I'm Carol Murphy on behalf of ALOA, and welcome to our webinar today. This is one in a series of monthly webinars featuring experts in topics that are specifically related to older adults and older adult ministry. Just a momentary housekeeping note. If you have questions, we're going to take questions at the end. There are two ways to handle questions. If you want to type your question, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can type it in there. The other option is for you to raise your hand, which is also on the bottom of the screen. If you do that, I can enable your microphone so that you can talk. So either way will work, and whatever you're more comfortable with is just fine for us. And without further ado, I will introduce Dr. Lydia Manning, who is a gerontologist and professor of gerontology at the Concordia University, Chicago, at their Center of Gerontology. And she is also a member of ALOA's board. And Lydia, please take it from there.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for taking time to join. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Everybody, we can see that, right, Carol? We're good?
Yes.
As Carol said, I am a social gerontologist. So for me, that means having a PhD in gerontology. I spend a lot of time thinking about aging, the social processes of aging, and everything that accompanies that. Specifically, my research for the last, 15 years at this point has been focused in the area of spirituality, religion, and health. And so my latest research project, which I conducted over the summer, I wanted to explore notions of support in communities of faith for people as they age. So hence I'm going to share with you then today some of my findings and some of my thoughts and my spiritual musings, if you will. So I will present my work, leave some nuggets for thoughts, and then hopefully we can have a lively Q&A session at the end of this. So the lived experience of aging in faith communities, exploring the perceptions of support for older adults. So my goal here today is to familiarize each of you with some of the main ideas and themes about spirituality, religion, and aging. So what are we talking about in our aging discourse and in the field of gerontology about these experiences and these constructs? I also want to help us wrap our brains around, what the population of people who are aging in faith communities looks like. It's probably not a surprise to many of you if you're in congregations and you're looking around, the average age of parishioners across the country we're aging, right? Our congregations are aging just like our communities. I want to consider the role communities of faith may play in support for people as they age. Are we doing a good job? If not, how could we potentially do a better job? And then ultimately share some of my findings, as I mentioned before, from my own research. So just to give you a timeline and some context in the field of gerontology, how many years really we've been sort of trying to wrap our brains around spirituality and aging and the importance it has in the lives of people. So in 1971, the first White House Conference on Aging, the National Interfaith Coalition was established that following year in 72, right? And so again, this idea that there's so many aspects of aging that are important, but a spiritual life is just as important for people as they age. The 70s to 90s, research was looking at the positive correlations associated with religion and well-being. In the 90s, we moved into many more advanced techniques to try to understand the complex and oftentimes mysterious relationship between religiosity, religion, and well-being for people as they age. And then really from the 2000s till now, the last 20 years, we've gotten very sophisticated with our multi-method approaches to trying to investigate the subject matter, complex outcomes, sophisticated structural equation modeling, again, trying to understand why it is that there's such a positive correlation between spirituality and or religion and positive aging outcomes. So why all the interest, right? And, I'm sure it's not lost on this audience that, for the first time ever, we're seeing a global phenomenon that we've never witnessed before, right? We have the largest generation aging in human history. And it's exciting. It also means that there are all kinds of realities and phenomena and situations and experiences that we haven't really dug into because we haven't seen them in this magnitude before. So I always tell my students, for those of you who are gerontologists, it's exciting. It's an exciting time. And we're all pioneers, right? We're pioneering as we're figuring all this out. So just some basic demographics. We grew from roughly 35 million Americans in 2010. It's estimated that by 2030 we'll be up to 70 to 75 million. So we're moving from 12% of a population over the age of 65 to 22%. So that's a significant increase. And I don't like to use language about, the age wave and the silver tsunami. It creates this kind of hyper vigilance around aging. But I try to imagine it as almost like a groundswell of people who are growing older and living longer. And I think it brings with it just as many opportunities and areas for growth and excitement, along with some of the potential challenges that we face too. So our communities of faith are aging just like our larger population. So this graphic just gives you an age distribution by religious attendance. And this is taken from some of the research from the Pew Research Center. So you can see the breakdown along the bottom, the 65 plus group to the right of the slide, the 50 plus group really to the right of the slide, looking at the percentages of people who attend religious services once a week, once or twice a month, seldom or never, or don't know. So again, the bulk of the attendance are for people ages 50 and over. And this just gives an illustration for generations all gathering together. So you have generational cohort by religious attendance. And again, the boomers, the silent and the greatest really are the lion's share of the cohorts that are attending religious services, at least in the United States. So it just gives you a snapshot, of the communities of faith and who's populating the services. So just a quick differentiation between spirituality and religion. If you look at some of the research and some of the literature, particularly in the field of aging, some scientists, some gerontologists will use those terms interchangeably. But I do think there's a little bit of a difference, right? Spirituality being more of a person's search for meaning. And that's about relationships with self, with other, with the universe, with God. It can look very diverse, and it can be, a much more personal experience. Whereas religion involves patterning, spiritual beliefs, practices, social institutions, with a much more solid community support and traditions over time. So religion's, I feel, a little bit more structured, if given these definitions, than spirituality. But I don't always use them interchangeably in my work. So I just wanted to make that distinction. So why does spirituality matter in later life? And if we look at the literature, and there has been a plethora of work done, really, as I showed you the timeline, for the last 40 years, we've been making sense of this, and at least in the field of gerontology. We know on average, controlling for all other variables, that having a spiritual identity and engaging in spiritual practices, and as well as religion and religious practices, that it's good for us and it has protective qualities. So if you, again, look at the research, we know that having high levels of spirituality often means that people report having improved marriage quality, higher levels of hope for their future, more optimism, better self-esteem. People are living longer, less death anxiety, slower rates of cognitive decline, less incidence of depression, and overall general sense of happiness and often purpose. So again, spirituality and religion are good for us. And that's not to say that, there are, for some people, the issues around spiritual struggle are real. But again, this is looking at average experience on average. If you look at the literature, if you just do a cursory literature review a search on spirituality, religiosity, aging, and health, you'll easily find over 1,000 empirical studies that all seem to validate the benefits of religion and spirituality on health and mental health outcomes. Some of the general trends, 76% of persons 65 and over regard religion as highly important. Of 4,000 older persons, the religiously active were half as likely to be depressed regardless of age, gender, race, social support, or disability. And coping through faith predicted positive outcomes in a study of 586 persons. So these are just some of the nuggets that I pulled from some of the data that I had, or some of the articles that I had been reading and looking at. But again, it just supports that religion and spirituality tend to be good for us. Spirituality in the life course, some studies find that religiosity is a constant throughout life, whereas other studies indicate that people may become more religious as they age. So there's some debate in the field about, do we become more religious or more spiritual as we age, or is it a constant? And so, some of it just depends on the literature, like anything else that you look and the data that you consult. I do think there is a uniqueness about being older in terms of spiritual development and aging. I think that as you age, you have an ability to look back across the life course and integrate parts into a larger whole. And I think in some ways it complements, if you look at Fowler's faith development and some of these larger key models, theories about faith formation and aging. I think that, spiritual development lends nicely to being able to integrate parts into a whole. As we age, we have the ability to gauge an inner or integrative activity, that throughout our lives. And so really making meaning and making sense. And we have the ability, we've learned over a lifetime how to face loss and challenges, right? So being old, we have a uniqueness for us as we age. Social support in communities of faith. And so for this project, I really wanted to understand, what were older adults' perceptions of support? Do people feel supported in their communities of faith and in their congregations? And do they feel like their congregations are meeting their needs as they age and as aging parishioners? So if you look at the literature on social support in faith communities, we know that strong social support systems are essential for good and physical mental health. I'm sure everybody has interacted with the literature on social isolation, and have heard, presentations and talks, and have read articles on the vital importance of being socially integrated as a way to bolster and maintain health later in life. We know social support is good for us. Most of the work, if you look at what's been done in the world of spirituality and aging, when people seek to understand social support, they are usually looking at social support provided by family members or close friends. But I think we really miss an opportunity when we don't stop to examine social support as it's exchanged in religious or spiritual institutions. I think there's a lot to be gained from trying to understand how communities, people within these faith communities or within these congregations can support one another. So more work needs to be done in those areas. So the purpose of this study, as I said before, is to understand and also describe how older adults perceive feeling supported or not supported in their faith communities. I wanted to better understand the experiences of older adults in relationship to connection, acceptance, belonging. And I was also curious in talking and interviewing people if anybody felt isolated or they felt excluded, or if there were experiences of ageism in their communities of faith. So I aim to talk to 50 people. For those of you who've done research, when you're working with a time constraint and also limited budgets, 50 sometimes doesn't happen. So this study is really ongoing. I'm still actively recruiting people. But at this point, I've talked to 14 people ranging in age from 63 to 84, mostly women. and all participants identified as either Christian or Jewish. Most were white, and most all had significant levels of education. So a very homogenous sample, if you will, in many ways. My goal is to diversify as much as possible. In moving forward, I would love to talk to people who are members of who identify as in other faith traditions. It was a qualitative study, and I used a phenomenological approach, and so I was very much interested in understanding the essential parts of what these folks were telling me. So I worked to bracket out my own biases. I coded the data using a process that in the field we call horizontalization. So going through line by line, word by word, and making sense of all the narratives that I had collected and what people were telling me to arrive at a composite understanding of what was happening or what is happening with the data set. So phenomenology, just a quick background, is a school of thought that emphasizes a focus on people's subjective experience. So I'm not trying to measure, I'm not trying to predict, I really just want to understand from a lived experience of people, of who I'm talking with, what their experiences of social support are like in their community of faith. So I'm trying to understand, again, from their perspective, what's happening. So what I asked, when I did the one-on-one face-to-face interviews, most of them lasted about an hour. I think I had one that lasted 3 hours. Describe for me what it has been like to age in your community of faith. I asked people to tell me whether or not they had felt supported, if they felt supported, what that felt like, and if they didn't, why they were feeling that supported. I wanted to understand how they experienced connection, and I wanted to know if they had ever felt isolated. And I also wanted to know from their perspective how they thought their faith community could better support or serve them spiritually. And then I also asked them, of course, to talk about any concerns that they had as an aging member in their congregation. And what I found, was encouraging, and in many ways a relief to me. um, Overwhelmingly, people reported having a very positive experience aging in their community of faith, and that overall, people felt, and most of the people that I had talked to had been a part of either their temple or their church for many, many years. But they had talked about, aging in that space and in that community, and watching everybody kind of grow and age together. So they reported it as a positive experience, one that they felt supported as a human. People talked about having more support, peer-to-peer support. Some described less support from leadership or from pastors or from rabbis, and talked about often feeling like they were in some ways not misunderstood, but that we do a much better job of presenting opportunities for worship, for belief, for ritual, and for meaning making that are really geared toward younger generations and families. And so some people reported having to work hard to kind of map whatever values or whatever lessons or whatever rituals were happening into their current life stage. So they felt like aging with their peers was much more supportive than necessarily being supported by leadership or by their pastor. Participants described feeling connected to their community, and they were really transparent about and direct about how they understood that connection was almost like a spiritual bank account, where they were articulate about how they understood what they got out was really based on what they put in. So their feelings of connection was directly related by what they were doing, how they were availing themselves, how much participation they were engaging in, how much energy they were expending to be a part of that community. And as I said before, some expressed concerns that even though they were trying to invest, oftentimes the opportunities were for investment were much more geared toward youth and families, and focused less on opportunities to kind of engage in a meaningful way around issues related to aging. And for some people that I did talk to who were doing that, they had sort of taken the lead. I talked to one woman who, she's created an entire group of older adults who come together to worship on their own, and she organically leads it, and has sort of made herself responsible for the aging ministry in her congregation. So people did talk, describe some concerns about how some of what happens is youth focused. No participant reported feeling isolated or excluded from their faith community, which I found to be, hopeful and wonderful news. And if there for the instances where exclusion was talked about, it was much more about people feeling excluded or alienated because of larger church politics, or if you will, or philosophical changes in the church, or things being out of alignment. It wasn't necessarily because people were older that they felt excluded. And then interestingly, and I think importantly, participants described wanting more content related to aging. People told me that they wanted more opportunities for ministry or worship specifically aimed at aging and the aging with intersection and faith. And some people talked about wanting leadership, or at least a point person or somebody to have the tools or to have more knowledge about aging and aging services, which I think is important. And I think also directly relates to the work that ALOA is attempting to do, by providing opportunities for education and information and supports to help bolster aging ministry throughout congregations. And then another finding, when I asked people to talk to me about some of the concerns that they had thinking about continuing to age in their respective faith community, people had a lot of anxiety about uncertainty of the future. And some of this comes back to, being able to invest. They knew if they could continue to invest, their spiritual ROI would be beneficial. They would be getting stuff out. But people had a lot of anxiety about, what about mobility and what about cognition? And if I have declines with either cognition or issues with mobility, people worried about being able to show up and still be seen and still be a part of the faith community. People worried about, if I'm out of sight, am I out of mind too? Recognizing that there were people in their own communities of faith who had slowly sort of disappeared. What happens to those people? Where are they? So a lot of anxiety about what happens when that's me. And a lot of concern about church leadership really having the ability to meet the and just, their role in that community of faith, worried about how that might change with diminished capacity or advanced age. So kind of taking a step back, here are these data, here are these conversations. What does this mean? Where do we go from here? I think faith communities are important and they're unique, and that they're really well positioned to offer programming that can help people explore spirituality, meaning making, and really be places where we can offer spaces for older adults to meaningfully engage and be socially integrated, and spiritually well. I think, faith communities, offer a sense of meaning and purpose. They can help people increase their well-being, improve their health outcomes, maintain a quality of life, bolster resilience, and to be happy. And so what does this mean, for communities of faith? I think most importantly, it means taking age seriously in the context of faith, and not just recognizing that our communities are growing older, but being really intentional and mindful about how those of us who are responsible for facilitating decisions and bringing in programming and working, with education and with worship, where the age it's there and it's present, and we're all, mindfully aware of it. I think building aging competency, combating ageism in our faith communities, and engaging in some sort of practice where we become gerontologically literate is also important. I think asking elders about their own meaning and purpose is really important. I think offering a safe space where people can feel like they are given tools to be resilient and prepared. Are there ways that communities of faith can do more with spiritual life reviews or spiritual biographies? how can we mindfully listen, how can we pay attention to social support, and how can we foster cross-generational connections, which I think is also important. And the UCC have actually done a really great job in creating a movement to openly and actively create age-friendly congregations. There's a toolkit, there's a process, and then congregations are actually identified as age-friendly. And I think that's something that can be done throughout various faith traditions. Ideas for programming. What ways can we create ancillary educational programming rooted in religious values that help us foster a sense of wonder or majesty or peace or connectedness? And then I think, encouraging older members to ask enduring questions, collecting faith stories. I know that Aloha has done a great job of helping older adults share faith stories, and it's a very intergenerational experience, and it's from what I understand, a beautiful experience. Asking older adults about, what is a spiritual or religious experience, and how does your faith manifest in your world? What is your journey? What do you want faith to be a central part of your decision making for you as you age or as you're planning to die? So I think, again, just being really mindful about what this looks like and how we can explore some of these aging and end of life issues together in a spiritual space is important. And I think it's important to craft age-friendly congregations. So opportunities for faith story core, prayer groups, volunteering experiences, visiting committees. I think there's a whole plethora of things that we can do to create age-friendly worship spaces. I know Aloha has explored, and we're exploring here at Concordia University, Chicago, developing a specialist in aging ministry program and certification process where we put together training materials that can be used to train a person to be sort of the aging expert in that community of faith, and then a toolkit that can bolster opportunities for aging ministry. Then I think also helping communities of faith be not another area agency on aging, but at least be aware enough of the aging services that are provided in their community that they can be places to help people, parishioners, older adults, family members access aging services should they need them. So maybe these look like care core models, or, some sort of, I don't know, I feel like we can be creative about how some of this might look. And then of course because I'm an educator, I do think educational series on aging related issues are important. And I think communities of faith are well positioned to deliver those. So with that, I mean, that's the summation right now of my current project. And I'm happy to explore questions or to hear from those of you who are in communities of faith. What are some examples of what you're doing in your congregations that you feel like bolster faith development for older adults, or that promote social connection, or that are really, really mindfully targeted to aging and aging well?
So once again, if you have a question, if you can either type it in that Q&A box and we will see it, or if you would like to ask it verbally, raise your hand and I can allow anyone to talk.
This is very interesting. I just wanted to share that my daughter-in-law is teaching. They're doing actually intergenerational faith formation ministry, which has proved to be very successful. And they do that once a month, where they have a project, and so around the table there are children, teenagers, adults, and seniors all working together on a particular project, or on a Bible story illustration, or they've done. I don't know if you're familiar with those. The stained glass coloring project. That's something that they've done. So seen that to be very effective. So, it's not every congregation necessarily can do that,
Right.
but it's anyway. I've seen it work well, and in our personal community here, and we have a Presbyterian and a Lutheran church sharing campus. Um, we've been engaging with seniors in a group that that's called Seen Years, SEEN years. And one concern I have is that, I mean, and this one is for them, but one overall concern I have is that the current generation kind of discounts any value in the wisdom of the elders. And that seems to be a change from times past when elders' wisdom was significantly valued. So I don't know if you have anything you'd like to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I teach gerontology programs. Yeah, I mean, I think we suffer in a collective culture, particularly in this country, from ageism. I mean, it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. It's ubiquitous and it's pervasive. And I think there's a marked shift where somehow we've moved from a place. And there's lots of theory about how this happens: modernization, the industrial movement, all kinds of things. But we shifted from trusting elder wisdom to worshiping youth. And I feel like there's a lack of balance. I was just having a conversation with a colleague yesterday who she takes her family to a Native American reservation every summer, and they work and they do all kinds of volunteer work. And she just said she's often struck by how embedded it is, this veneration for ancestors and for wisdom and for elders, and how we don't share that. And so I do think, and I don't know that I'm overly Pollyanna-ish, but I feel like if we're going to heal some of those wounds that are wrapped around ageism, it starts with intergenerational programming. I really think if we can teach our children to kind of right the ship, if you will, and to respect elders and to be more integrated, we stand half a chance of kind of breaking out of some of this ageist way that we do things. We love to age segregate. We're good at it. And I think there's a time and place. But I also think I love this when hearing you say that, you have multi-generations sitting around a table and interacting with scripture and worship from all these different perspectives. I mean, I think those conversations are important. Was saying that he was really mindful about being present in his aging and having to be part of basically everything he does wherever he goes, and he tries to be quote unquote accidental in being intentional. And I was just saying, I think it's important too, like there's this outside understanding of aging, but then we have to be mindful about how we internalize it. And so I think kind of claiming our own presence and our own personhood as we age is really important and wonderful. And so, I appreciated Paul's comment. Marlon says, not so much a question, but sharing. Our congregation has journeyed into the services of our elderly parishioner, home visitations, communion for shut-ins, and help in personal issues and finance. St. Marlon also says, one particular situation we've used in special donations to procure dog food for a blind couple in financial need. This helps keep their seeing eye dog healthy. We've observed it's often really hard for seniors to help other seniors. So yeah, I mean, I think, experiences of supporting peers is important. And, I think the intention and the mindfulness is important. I do think, I've been doing research as we've been putting together the spirituality or the specialist in aging ministry certificate. And I think seminaries could do a better job of helping, they're training the next generation of spiritual leaders, religious leaders. Like, what exposure are we providing from the educational level in preparing people. Deaconess programs, I think we're all aging and we're all in various stages of it, but I think we could do a better job of sort of educating our congregations and providing tools to do some of this work.
I go to quarterly staff meetings.
Oh, wait, I think they're still hearing you.
Okay.
Is there another hand? No.
Oh, it looks like. Timothy, again, it looks like you raised your hand again. So if I cut you off there, my apologies.
Sure.
Go ahead. We're having a little trouble hearing you, so if you can.
Okay.
Move
Let me just see if I can come closer. Can you hear me now? I recently retired as an intern. I spent in recent years, medicine has become much more fragmented with people specializing in hospital medicine. I actually specialized in post-acute medicine or nursing home medicine. And when I would go to quarterly staff meetings, not having admitted patients since 2011, very few of my colleagues were still practicing, and the young people were not interested in any kind of relationship with me or any wisdom I had about hospital medicine. And quite frankly, hospital medicine has become very myopic and no longer provides comprehensive care, and they actually need better feedback, but they weren't interested in feedback. I just felt very disrespected, and I've been on the leadership positions in that hospital for many years, and it was like I don't exist. And I think that's a reflection of really the whole work culture, where people work in isolation. They live in their Facebook pages, and their world kind of revolves around them, and it really excludes seniors quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, there are, I think, lots of opportunities for people to, if businesses and organizations are open, to come in and to do sort of, I don't know about generational coaching. I don't know if that's the right language, but I do think businesses and organizations miss out on opportunities to really maximize the talents and the skills and the wisdom, the institutional memory of some of their older workers, for sort of the illusion of younger knowledge. I know that there's a nonprofit group, I forget the acronym, but they have been, I think it's a shoot off from a government committee, but they have age-friendly workplace training. So there's a list of a slew of nationally and internationally respected companies who have gone through training and who have been certified now as age-friendly workplaces. Some of the larger, like insurance companies. So I can't tell how much of it is lip service, but I do hope, right, that as we continue to age as a population, that we can kind of reframe some of this and be, the word capitalize, I don't like it, but again, make the most of the talents and skills of older workers instead of exclude or dismiss. I always get nervous when I'm, maybe it's my own reverse ageism, but even with some of my own providers and a practice of doctors, I'm like, oh my word, everybody here is under the age of 30, right? Like, where are the seasoned professionals? And so, maybe that's my own age bias, but yeah, I hate to hear, Timothy, that that's your experience. It's unfortunate. But I have talked to several people, who are significantly older, who have left the workplace, who are leaving the workplace, describe similar experiences of issues around visibility, right, and feeling invisible. So.
Comment I'd make is I think that's happening in churches too.
And happening in churches as well.
Yeah. The pastors, at least in our ministries tend to focus on trying to reach out to millennials, the
Mm-hmm.
younger generation. And I think there's obviously reasons to do that in the sense that they are the future, but there's not much focus on the needs of seniors.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the other one I'd make, my name is Steve Gieske. I'm Tim's brother and Chris's brother. One of my concerns is we're beginning to use deaconesses or deacons, but they don't seem to be, we don't seem to focus at all on what visitation is, or otherwise we're so focused on the visitation of people within our community, but there are people outside the community that just as important visitation is. And I don't think we understand that. We've become so inwardly focused as religious and spiritual groups that we're missing what I feel God's calling us to do.
Right. Well, I think about that in the context of social isolation and loneliness. And I think that we communities of faith, congregations, I agree, like we could be better about being more open or more welcoming, or being these sort of hubs that foster human connection outside of our faith boundaries.
Yes.
You know? Which again seems like very much larger Christian values, right? I mean, if it's about love and grace and connection and mercy, yeah, I think I'm actually working on another research project. We're writing a grant, and I'm working with some researchers at University of Chicago, looking at the role that communities of faith can really play in creating opportunities for social connection, not only for current members, but that's, again, how can they reach out in the hubs and in the neighborhoods and in the communities, and be not only places of social connection, but places where people can get the information about the services,
Yes.
the other supports they need that could potentially even improve health outcomes. Right. And in an effort to understand that, are there ways that faith communities then can become more attractive to younger generations while still meeting the needs of the older generations who are actually showing up to participate? So hopefully we get a grant and that project can happen.
Tim, can you get me to my question?
We have additional comments from Paul Haberstock, who also said, I also intentionally engage healthcare practitioners in matters of my health issue and spirituality.
Paul, will they talk to you about it? Will they engage back with you if you have issues, if spiritual health related questions? Because I find some practitioners are uncomfortable. I guess it depends on who you go to.
Right.
And what does Marlon say? Oh, a special elder needs training program at the congregational level can help us fill in the void you somewhat mentioned, so that elders can help other elders have a feeling good to do this in service. Yeah, I agree. I mean, would you agree, Carol, that Olo has been attempting to do this work for quite some time, right?
Yes.
These needs and fill in these gaps, and the gaps are there, somebody should be lining up around Aloha headquarters, right? I'm surprised there's not a line out around the door to get these tools and these resource kits and all this information.
So Paul has responded, yes, they're respectful and responsive, especially interns and residents. So good for you, Paul, that you've got that kind of climate, because
that name's familiar to me too, Christine Pulchatsky. I think she's also an academic and does work in the area. Marlon wants to know if I've had the opportunity to discuss serving elders and how they feel. And I have not, in a formal sense, I have not done any research or a targeted investigation, if you will, but I just in general, I mean, I see older adults in my own communities serving each other, not necessarily in the context of faith. I know where they go. There are various faith communities but that would be an interesting study. Marlon, where do you go to find resource kits? Well, right now, ALOA has several resources online on our website. And we're also in the process of developing the Equipping 21st Century Disciples project. So hopefully sooner rather than later, we'll have, virtual packets, binders that people can have access to. Is that fair to say, Carol? And
yes, and we're starting a new program called Congregational Centers of Resilience and Aging. And the first component of that is a toolkit for congregations to use. So that will be developed in 2020 with the goal of being done at the end of this year.
are there any other questions or any other thoughts or?
Well, Lydia, we certainly appreciate your time and you sharing your expertise and your research and your obvious care for older adults.
Thank you for participating and for asking great questions and leaving really wonderful nuggets for thought.
And we will post the slides from the PowerPoint. So if you are interested in some of the research and some of the data, that will be there, as well as the recording of this.
And look for ALOA tools and products and programs, right, that we'll be pushing out too.
Right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and be well and blessings.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and Timothy, and I will not, I will volunteer not to make a mess of your last name. So, but